Can you believe it? We are now on week 9 already of Stop It, which means there's only 1 week left. Stop it. This week is stop forgetting to ask why you are where you are. Stop forgetting to ask why you are where you are. The book of Lamentations, chapter 3 and verse 40 says, let us test and examine our ways and return to the Lord. Stop ignoring the part you play in why you are where you are. That's the point. It's actually wonderfully liberating that we hardly ever land up where we are by accident. It's the result of a series of choices we've made along the way. Now, why is that particularly liberating this morning? Because by the same token, a whole series of new choices that you make along the way can get you to a very different destination. Very few of us landed up where we are by accident. We made choices that inadvertently carried consequences that put us where we are. Can I just bring to your attention that the same principle actually applies to guys and girls in this room who are doing very well? You're doing very well because you've made a series of choices. For goodness sake, keep making them. Because it's the regular putting in place of good decisions that keeps you where you are. That's why it's so unnecessary for your average 50-year-old man to suddenly have a midlife crisis. You don't need to change and get the soft top vehicle and change your hair color and get a tattoo. It's said that this is going to be the first generation of people when they get old into old age homes, it's going to look like they were wrapped in wet newspaper. In a support group once, a woman commented that she'd had 3 abusive husbands in a row and she's not going to get another one. Another woman courageously spoke up and said, no, you haven't. You've had 1 abusive husband with 3 different names. You always pick the same guy over and again. Ouch, sometimes truth hurts. In all of these marriages, she was the common denominator. Sitting in that room, she recognized she was always able to find a certain type with certain behaviors and choose that man above all others. The lesson, she was finally realizing she was playing a part in her own story. A big difference between fruitful stroke successful people and others is that those who are able in love, life, relationships, business, able to ask themselves the question, what part am I playing in the situation I find myself in right now? In other words, they don't see themselves only as victims even when they are. They'll always ask, is there something to be learned about myself in this that I can turn the situation around or make sure I never find myself in this again? How have I contributed to where I am now? What do I need to learn out of this? These are the people who realize that in life, they're not only acted upon, they're also actors in the story. They take responsibility. We all play a part in where we are. And when we learn what the part is and how we're contributing to it, suddenly new doors and new paths can begin to open up. There's a story told of a woman, and this is all too common. A woman at a seminar who asked, how do you deal with critical people? The guy giving the seminar said, now why would you want to do that? Dealing with critical people is horrendous. Her response was, I have to learn how to deal with critical people. They're everywhere. When asked exactly what are these people like and where are they everywhere, she begins to describe judgmental, critical personalities at work, church, her family, her social circles, basically everywhere. In a sense, she's right. They were everywhere. But what she didn't understand is they were in her everywhere. Apparently, she had the uncanny ability to find them, no matter where they were. It seemed she'd be drawn to the most critical person in the group and try and become friends with them. And then afterwards say, all they do is criticize me. What she had never thought about is she had the strong tendency to feel bad whenever someone was critical of her and suddenly have a strong drive to gain their approval. So when a critical person was in the mix, she would be drawn to that person and try and make that critical person like her somehow. Now, while it's true that critical people are everywhere, they don't all have to be your friends. But as long as she needed the approval of critical people, she kept on pursuing them. And having this system in place where she's trying to get approval from people because she's trying to accomplish her goal of getting critical people to approve of her. Without her even realizing it subconsciously, her script in life required her having to find a critical person. Always looking for them. And then suddenly she's never good enough for them. The only real way is to stop pleasing them. Change your reaction. You will never turn a critical person into an approving person. Dogs bark, criticize people, criticize. It's what they do. You want to get a dog to start meowing is the same as getting a critical person to stop criticizing. Your being good enough will never change a critical person into a non-critical person. She has to start asking, what am I doing? You see, she's enabling the situation. She's got to go into a mix and say, why am I where I am? Why at work? Why do I always find these people? Because you're enabling them. She has to ask the question, why do I keep finding these people? The answer to the question gives her something she can do. She suddenly realized she had a driving need to make unpleasant people like her. She had to learn to stay separated from their opinions of her own. She had to realize there's other people in the room of her life that aren't critical who would be much nicer to be friends with. She had to learn to let critical people go. Not everyone's going to like you. You don't want everyone to like you. She had to give herself control over something she had control over, which was herself. Isn't it funny that when you start to change in a situation, the situation can start to change? But if you don't change, your situation isn't going to. The Bible puts it like this in Proverbs 4, verse 23. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the issues of life. The Bible is teaching us we play a part in our life situations. You might not have thought it, but you have things going on in and around you all the time. Your appetites, needs, your view of life, your biases, your tastes, your hurts, fears, issues, your background. All of that plays a part in why you do what you do. And it all flows out of your heart. What you are on the inside plays a major role in the situation you find yourself in the outside. Why does the same thing always happen to me? Well, because you're an actor in your life. Which brings us to a very tricky subject, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but the issue of codependency. Those of you who have nothing to do with addicts thinking, what on earth is a codependent? Well, I'll help you. In the last few decades of addiction treatment, a discovery was made on the codependency in the subject of addictions. Basically, researchers discovered that an addict needs a codependent to enable them to stay addicted. And codependent people are those who continually find themselves in relationship with addicts. So what it means is they're drawn to each other. So the first point I want to make around how you actually find your way out of this is this thing of permission. You need to understand from time to time the reason things happen in your life is because you're giving permission for it to happen. Very little happens against your permission. Whether you're passive or active, you are giving permission to those things. So the Bible says, guard your heart above all others. I'm in a life cycle of debt because you're giving permission for your wallet to stay open. Simple. I don't like what I've become. Well, you gave yourself permission to become that. Stop blaming. Start looking at where you need to pay attention. Here's why this attraction is a match. Here's why. Because the addict does not take responsibility for his or her life. It's always someone else's fault. An addict will not take responsibility for their own lives. And then along comes the codependent who finds it that they have to be responsible to take care of people who don't take care of themselves. So a codependent wants to take responsibility for someone who doesn't take responsibility for themselves. They have this need, like a grown-up person needing a little doll. And you need to constantly take care of it. And you find your purpose in taking care of something or someone. Cat, dog, mouse, addict. You find someone that you're going to go and pour yourself into. So they find each other. And this relationship works well till either the addict repents or the codependent does. Then it's just hell on earth. but we play a part in it. And so you need to understand from the beginning, you giving permission to things. You remember the story of the man driving across the road and his car's doing this, and in the end he rolls the car and he gets out, he's blind drunk with a jacket on, and he opens his pocket and he pulls out that empty bottle, that half jack of Jack Daniel. And he starts crying like Elkies do. And he looks at this empty bottle and he says, "It's all your fault. I am where I am because of you. You've ruined me. You've messed with my life. I want nothing more to do with you. It's over." And there's a rock and he throws it and it breaks. And he sulks like alcoholics do. And then he opens the other pocket and there's a brand new golden bottle of Jack Daniels. And he says, "But you had nothing to do with any of this. You are so good." You know where it goes, right? A little relationship because you're constantly giving permission to things that shouldn't be there. So what do? You need to protect yourself. Put boundaries in place. Sometimes, even if it's someone else's fault that you're being drawn into a situation, you need to understand, where have I given permission for this to happen? Why am I getting so affected by people who are critical? Because they're phoning me and they blurb on me. "Oh, I'm so glad you're someone I can talk to." Sometimes you don't want those people talking to you, because their negativity becomes your negativity. You wake up singing, "Oh, what a beautiful morning." And by the time they're finished on the phone, you want to get a gun. The Bible says in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 17, "You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest you incur sin because of him." NIV says, "Don't hate your brother in your heart. Rebuke your brother frankly so you don't share in his guilt." Sometimes we need to just put boundaries in place and confront others that their issues don't jump over the wall of our lives and become our issues. So we're not carrying the stuff we're not meant to be carrying. Stop and ask yourself the question, what part am I playing in being where I am, why I am? My office environment is toxic. Dial out. Put music in your ears. I've got nothing to talk about. Did you know? Hey, I'm not part of your circle. We're all part of the problem if we're enabling it. Change starts when we ask the question, what in me needs to change to get better? Now, you find yourself in a position where you've been giving permission unhelpfully. You got to wonder, what do I do? You suddenly realize you need protection. And so you go from permission to protection. And protection is when you close the door of your heart to unhelpful influences. You decide, I'm not letting this in anymore. I am not going to be critical. And honestly, sometimes some of you just need a little break of about 15 years from social media. Just get off it. It's amazing how much junk is in social media that you believe that was written by someone with an agenda. Just listen, newspapers sell newspapers to make money, not to tell the truth. Please don't ever believe everything you read in a newspaper. But you're swayed by it. And this country's going to hell. Because you read some article by someone who probably is. Protect yourself. Joshua, going into an alien situation where he would have to defeat an entire smorgasbord of enemies, says this in Joshua 1, "I will not let your word depart from my lips. I will meditate day and night on your word." Daniel, in the midst, as an exile in an evil empire, goes away, withdraws himself to pray 5 times a day. But you and I, every spare gap, it's Facebook again. Oh, negative. Protect yourself. Protect your heart. Protect your mind. Protect your mouth. Approach things differently. How? So stop giving permission, protect yourself, and then position yourself well. How do you do that? We look at James chapter 1 and verse 2. "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all, without reproach, and it will be given him. Sheesh. The entire realization of the part we play in our lives is summed up in this passage. What do I need to learn? How can my situation become more complete, that I'm not lacking in an area of my life? How can I be wiser that I don't repeat the same mistakes? James chapter 1 from verse 2 is going to help us, and it helps us in three little areas. The one it does is it starts off by saying change starts with attitude. Consider it joy when you face trials of many kinds. And you get up in the morning because you had a fight with your neighbor, and you say, what did James know? Count it joy, my brothers, when you face trials of various. What trials have you ever had? Do you understand how hard my life is? James, the brother of Jesus, helping protect the church against the onslaught of Roman occupation. These men died for their faith by just daring to call themselves Christians in a land of not only political but religious persecution. It was becoming excessively dangerous to be a Christian. There were no meetings like we have now, sanctioned by the state in these times. So when this man says to you, listen, consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds. Listen, because his circumstances were worse than yours. Pay attention to these words, because trust me, if you're a believer here today, you are going to see him one day. Then have that discussion around who knew what was what when it came to the subject of pure joy. How are we supposed to be joyful when we face trials? Surely the normal process when you're passed over for a promotion, you're in a relationship with an addict, you're abandoned in a divorce, your body's all sore, you're going through financial difficulties, surely you're not supposed to feel joyful. It's like, how are you doing? Oh, I lost my home. Yes! And you? God's not telling us not to feel pain, hurt, disappointment. He is saying this, feel. You have the right to feel what you do, but learn to take a different stance towards life. Lift yourself up and look at what's actually going on around you. See your opportunity as a situation where you can learn something. The test where we hear, the testing of your faith, is not a test that you pass or fail. When it says here that your perseverance and the testing of your faith, the language around testing makes testing easier to embrace, because the word testing here refers to testing certain metals in order to remove impurities that become stronger and better. So when I go back and I read the text again, the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, or NIV says perseverance. Why does the testing of my faith produce steadfastness or perseverance? Because when I'm tested in my faith, according to the Strongs, it means that I am being approved. I am being examined. I'm being discerned. I am being scrutinized to see whether a thing is genuine or not. I am being deemed worthy. I am being put to the proof. I am being experimented upon. My trustworthiness is getting proved. In other words, through tough situations, God is removing weaknesses and patterns in our lives that are unhelpful to us. The reason why you should consider it joy when you go through trials is because a bad thing happens to you. You suddenly find yourself leaning on Jesus unlike you've ever leaned on him before, which tells you you belong to him. There's nothing worse than a trial happens and you realize at the end of it, the last thing you did was go to Jesus. Because you need to ask the question. Some of us can predict when we're going to die within about 8 years. So you get to 90, you know. But to some of us, it happens in a moment you're unaware of. Death can come quickly. Have you been tested and proved? Has perseverance, because when you persevere, you lean into something. I used to run the 1,500 meters for my school when I was in standard 9 in matric, but the problem was I never ever trained for it. And so every Wednesday at school meet, when you do that 1,500, I was the beetroot face. And I was persevering to one end only, to finish. I wasn't a record setter. I just wanted to finish. And some of us, when we persevere, we realize, hey, I just want to finish. Why do I want to finish? Hey, I don't fear death. Why don't I fear death? Because Christ has done something in me. That's a reason for joy. Because this story ends. For every guy and girl in this room, this story ends. Is that okay? I promise you, I think I'm still like a child. Sometimes I act like one. But I remember that I started this church when I was 24. Who's a 24-year-old? Stand up. Anyone 24 here right now? Or younger, 24, 23. Anyone? One. Look at that little girl over there. I looked like her, just with shorter hair. That was my age when I started this church. Now I'm only slightly older. Hey? I mean, I'm 45. I look at it, I thought to myself, I'm just past 40. I'm not thinking I'm nearly 50. But my race too will come to an end at some point. But have I been tried? What is my attitude when I face trials? Joy results when I realize that when I'm put through pressure, hey, I lean to Christ, which isn't a natural thing, which means He's in me. Which means His Spirit is doing stuff in me. My attitude needs to change. Second thing it says, trials produce maturity. That's what James tells us, so that we don't lack anything. You see, if you quit or you bail out in a difficult situation, the critical person or life's too hard, and we don't stop to ask, why am I where I am? What's the part I'm playing? Well, number one, maybe my attitude isn't great. Number two, maybe I'm not growing. Maybe I'm not maturing. That's why. I'm just not learning. God is telling us to face the trial. Look how it's testing us. Can I tell you that trials are the only way we can actually grow? You cannot move on to bigger or better things without the process of going through hard yards. Is that all right? There's no such thing as an instant success. It may be true that so-and-so burst on the scene. No one's heard of Wade van Niekerk from Bloemfontein. Suddenly, the fastest man in the world, over 400 meters. Then you read his story of the years of sweat and trial and difficulty. What that was just his moment to show what he had done through his trials. There is no instant success. Where we look at the businessman who's achieved and we forget the pound of flesh he paid to get there. It was hard. The bodybuilder, the sprinter, the whatever you like, it's years of dedication in the same direction that gets you where you are. Trials are good for us. It's only through that resistance that we actually grow. Even Jesus was perfected through His suffering. But we want a theology these days that says your best life starts with just believing a promise and God clears all obstacles out of your way. You will never grow if you don't have obstacles of some kind. Difficulty of some kind. And I want to tell you, you can't pray and shendarabakose things out of your life that God wants there. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. You are the workmanship of God. And if He decides it's time for a trial, if trial was good enough for His Son Jesus, trial is good enough for you. Maturity is developed as we embrace the discipline and the perseverance required to push through something till we overcome. Quitters don't grow. I want to say an obvious statement. Please don't hold it against me. But stunted lives create midget thinking. Stunted lives create midget thinking. It's people who refuse to grow that remain where they are. It's midget thinking that causes us to always live in the same place with the same maturity because we face the trial, but we never push through it. We decide, I don't need this. And we get into trouble. The last one out of the three. The first one it starts with your attitude, consider it joy. The second one is push through your trial. It's a wonderful thing for me to see how young parents have a baby and how quickly they mature. Isn't it? You know that little delight they prayed for and cried about? Lord, please give me a baby. Please give me a baby. They cry for the baby. When the baby comes, they cry till they're like 60. But there's nothing to sort out the selfishness of an individual like having a baby, where nothing's about you again. And you start to mature and grow, and your attitude changes, and now suddenly it all becomes around somebody else, not you. But the third thing that needs to happen, this is wonderful. That passage ends with God's love and no reproach. If you want the courage to no longer stay where you are, why you are, and to say, Lord, I want to trust you. I want to break these cycles. I know I play a part in the process of my life. I have to own up that the reason my life is where it is not because prophetically I'm a model to the world. It's because I'm a stuff up. Because you know, that's what we do. If we can't take responsibility, we say God's doing something. Because God has made me such a mess in every relationship I've ever faced. God. No, it's your sinful, fallen nature that needs redeeming. That's what it is. And you need to own up and say, Lord, I need you to work the fruit of the Spirit. You need to work the perfection of Christ in me. And in that effort, God doesn't look at you and call you a loser. He says, I will cover you with my love. There is no reproach. When you ask for wisdom in how to deal with this, I will give you wisdom in my love without finding reproach or fault with you. Some of the biggest problems that some of us may have in this room is that when we don't know how to do something or we fail at something and we realize why we are where we are, we start seeing ourselves in a critical light. We start thinking, I'm bad, I'm not good enough, I don't qualify. This passage is encouraging because God says, I won't reproach you. I will help you mature, I'll help you grow. It says God gives generously to all without finding fault. To give generously, the definition of the word generous is this: to show a readiness to give more of something than is strictly necessary or expected. It is to show kindness towards others. It is larger or more plentiful than is usual or necessary. Can I ask you this? When you decide today, I am largely where I am because of my actions. I've helped create this. But I'm going to look to the Lord for wisdom as to how He's going to help me through this. Can I ask you from today to begin to have a similar attitude to yourself that God has to you? God says to you, I don't find fault, and I will give generously. So maybe you, feeling a failure this morning, should learn this. I'm not going to find fault. I'm not going to decide I'm the worst. I'm going to learn to bask in the love of a God who cares for me. Because it's not about finding faults, it's about learning. It's about learning. Psalm 103 from verse 13. As a father shows compassion to his children, so the Lord shows compassion to those who fear Him. For He knows our frame. He remembers that we're dust. As for man, his days are like grass. He flourishes like a flower of the field. For the wind passes over it and it's gone, and its place it knows no more. But the steadfast love of the Lord is from everlasting to everlasting on those who fear Him. His righteousness to children's children, to those who keep His covenant and remember to do His commandments. There are guys and girls in this room, quite honestly, you're your own worst enemy. There's no motivation for personal change because you keep thinking you're not good enough. Psalm 34 verse 17, and I close with this. When the righteous cry for help, the Lord hears and delivers them out of all their trouble. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted. He saves the crushed in spirit. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him out of them all. Can you stand with me, please?